You know what's worse than losing both your parents in the same week? Having your own brother look right through you at their funeral like you're a stranger, like you don't even exist. And the crazy part? He blamed me for grieving too much. Yeah, you heard that right. He said I took too much attention at our parents' funeral. So I made a choice that day. I stayed quiet. I kept my distance. And months later, when the guilt finally caught up to him, when he showed up at my door begging for peace, I had to decide what mattered more: revenge or family. And what I chose changed everything. Look, I need to take you back to where this whole mess started, because nothing about what happened makes sense unless you understand how close we used to be. My brother Daniel and I, we weren't just siblings. We were best friends. Growing up, we did everything together. We shared a room until we were teenagers. We had inside jokes that would make us laugh until our stomachs hurt. We protected each other at school. When I got bullied in 6th grade, Daniel was the one who stood up for me, even though he was only in 4th grade. That's the kind of bond we had. Our parents, mom and dad, they raised us to stick together no matter what. Dad used to say that friends will come and go, but family is forever. Mom would always tell us that we were each other's built-in best friend. And we believed that. We really did. Even as adults, even after we both moved out and started our own lives, we stayed close. We talked on the phone at least twice a week. We had Sunday dinners at mom and dad's house. We celebrated every holiday together. Our kids, his 2 boys and my daughter, they grew up like siblings themselves. So when I got that phone call on a Tuesday morning in March, my whole world just stopped. It was Daniel calling. His voice was shaking. He could barely get the words out. There had been an accident, a car accident. Mom and Dad were driving back from their anniversary weekend at the cabin they loved. Some drunk driver ran a red light, hit them head on. They didn't make it. Either of them. Gone. Just like that. In 1 second, the 2 people who gave us life, who taught us everything, who loved us unconditionally, they were just gone. I remember dropping the phone. I remember my legs giving out. I remember this sound coming out of me that didn't even sound human. My husband found me on the kitchen floor, and I couldn't even explain what happened at first. I couldn't form words. When I finally told him, he held me while I cried. And I cried for hours. I cried until I had no tears left. And then I cried some more. The next few days were a complete blur. There were so many decisions to make. Funeral arrangements, obituaries, contacting relatives, going through their things. It was overwhelming. Daniel and I, we tried to handle it together. We met at their house to start sorting through everything. And at first, it seemed like we were on the same page. We were both devastated. We were both trying to keep it together for each other. But something started to shift. I noticed it during our second meeting at the house. I was going through Mom's closet, and I found this sweater she used to wear all the time. It was this soft purple cardigan that she'd put on whenever she was reading or watching TV. I picked it up and just held it to my face, and I could still smell her perfume on it. And I broke down. I sat on the floor of her closet and just sobbed into that sweater. Daniel walked in and saw me, and instead of comforting me, instead of sitting down with me like the brother I knew, he just stood there. He looked uncomfortable, annoyed even. He said we needed to keep moving, that we had a lot to get through. I wiped my face and got up, but something felt off. Something felt cold in the way he looked at me. The funeral was scheduled for that Saturday. We decided on a joint service since they died together. It felt right that they'd be honored together. The days leading up to it were torture. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat.
I'd be okay for an hour, and then something would remind me of them and I'd fall apart all over again. A commercial for a restaurant they liked, a song that mom used to sing, the sound of a car that reminded me of dad's old truck. Everything was a trigger. I called Daniel every day. I needed him. I needed my brother. But our conversations got shorter and shorter. He seemed distant, distracted. When I tried to talk about mom and dad, about memories or how much I missed them, he changed the subject. He'd say he had to go. He was busy with the arrangements, he said. He was holding it together for his family, he said. And I tried to understand. People grieve differently, right? Maybe he just needed space. Maybe he was processing it in his own way. The morning of the funeral, I was a wreck. I could barely function. My husband had to help me get dressed because my hands were shaking so bad. I put on the black dress I bought specifically for this day, and I hated it. I hated that I had to buy a dress to bury my parents. I hated that this was real. Part of me kept thinking I'd wake up and it would all be a nightmare. We got to the funeral home early. The place was already filling up with people. Family, friends, people from their church, coworkers, neighbors. Mom and dad were loved by so many people. Seeing everyone there, it hit me again how big this loss was, how many lives they touched. I saw Daniel across the room with his wife and kids. I walked over to him. I needed a hug from my brother. I needed us to hold each other up through this impossible day. But when I got close, when I said his name, he barely looked at me. He gave me this quick, stiff side hug and then turned back to talk to someone else. Like I was just another guest offering condolences, like I wasn't his sister, like we weren't in this together. I stood there for a second, confused, hurt, but I told myself he was overwhelmed. We all were. So I moved on. I greeted other family members. I accepted hugs. I cried with aunts and uncles and cousins. Everyone kept telling me how sorry they were, how wonderful mom and dad were, and every kind word made it hurt more. The service started. Daniel and I were supposed to sit together in the front row with our families, but when I went to sit down, Daniel and his family took up most of the row. There was barely space. His wife had to move her purse so I could squeeze in at the end. Not next to Daniel, not next to my brother. I was on the outside edge, separated from him by his wife and kids. The service was beautiful and heartbreaking. The pastor talked about their lives, their love, their faith. Friends shared stories. Someone sang mom's favorite hymn. I cried through all of it. I went through an entire pack of tissues. At one point, I was crying so hard I was shaking, and I reached over past his wife, trying to grab Daniel's hand, trying to connect with my brother in our shared grief. He pulled his hand away. He didn't even look at me, just pulled his hand back like my touch burned him. I felt like I'd been slapped. I sat back, stunned. What was happening? Why was he acting like this? This was our parents' funeral. This was the moment we needed each other most. But he was shutting me out completely. After the service, there was a reception at the church hall. More people, more condolences, more painful conversations. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I pushed through because that's what you do. Daniel was on the other side of the room the entire time. Every time I tried to approach him, he'd move away. He'd start a conversation with someone else. He'd turn his back to me. Finally, I cornered him near the coffee table. I asked him straight up what was going on, why he was avoiding me, why he was treating me like this. And that's when he said it. That's when my brother, my best friend, looked me in the eye and said I was making everything about me. He said I was being too emotional, that I was taking too much attention, that people were more worried about me than remembering mom and dad. Can you believe that? At our parents' funeral, he accused me of stealing attention by grieving too much. I was speechless. I didn't even know what to say. Too emotional? They were our parents. How could anyone be too emotional at their own parents' funeral? And attention? I wasn't performing. I wasn't trying to be the center of anything. I was just heartbroken. I was just lost. But apparently to Daniel, that was too much. That was inappropriate. I asked him if he was serious, if he really believed what he was saying. He said people process grief differently and that I needed to pull myself together, that I was making his kids upset, that I was making it harder for everyone. And then he walked away. He just walked away from me and left me standing there, humiliated and confused, and more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I left the reception early. I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. My husband drove me home, and I cried the whole way. I cried for mom and dad. I cried for the loss of them. And I cried for Daniel, for whatever was broken in him that made him treat me like that. The days after the funeral were dark, really dark. I fell into this deep depression. I couldn't get out of bed most days. I'd lie there thinking about my parents, about all the things I never got to say, all the moments we'd never have. And I thought about Daniel, about how he abandoned me when I needed him most, about how the one person who was supposed to understand exactly what I was feeling had turned his back on me. I didn't call him, and he didn't call me. For the first time in our entire lives, we went days without talking, then weeks, then a month. My husband asked if I was going to reach out, try to fix things, but I couldn't. I wasn't the one who needed to fix anything. I didn't do anything wrong. I grieved for my parents. That's all I did. And if that was too much for Daniel, if that made him uncomfortable, that was his problem, not mine. I focused on healing, on therapy, on remembering mom and dad in my own way. I went through their photos. I kept some of their things that meant something to me. That purple cardigan of mom's, dad's favorite coffee mug, little things that made me feel close to them. I wrote letters to them that I'd never send. I talked to them out loud when I was alone. I did what I needed to do to process the biggest loss of my life. And you know what? Slowly, I started to feel a little better. Not okay. I don't think you're ever really okay after losing both parents, but better, more stable. I could get through a whole day without breaking down. I could laugh at something and not feel guilty for feeling a moment of joy. I could talk about mom and dad without falling apart. I was healing in my own time, in my own way. But there was this hole where Daniel used to be. I missed him. I missed my brother. I missed our talks. I missed having someone who shared my history, who knew mom and dad the way I did. But I also couldn't forget what he did, how he made me feel small and wrong for grieving, how he abandoned me when I needed family most. 3 months passed, 3 months of silence between us, until one evening in late June. I was in the kitchen making dinner when the doorbell rang. My husband answered it. I heard voices. And then my husband came into the kitchen with this look on his face. He said Daniel was at the door, that he wanted to talk to me. My heart started racing. Part of me wanted to run to him. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to the front door, and there he was, my brother. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. He had dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. We stood there staring at each other for a moment. Then he asked if we could talk. I almost said no. I almost told him to leave. But something in his face, something broken and desperate, made me step outside. We sat on my front porch steps. The same steps where we used to sit as kids when we'd sneak out to look at stars. Daniel didn't waste time. He started talking. He said he was sorry, that he'd been wrong, that he'd been so wrong about everything. He said he'd been carrying guilt for months, that it was eating him alive, that he couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't be present for his own family because he was drowning in regret. He explained what happened. He said that when mom and dad died, something broke in him. He couldn't process it, couldn't accept it, so he shut down emotionally. He went into this mode where he just focused on logistics, on arrangements, on staying busy. Because if he stopped, if he let himself feel it, he thought he'd fall apart completely. And then he saw me at the funeral, saw me crying openly, saw me expressing all the pain he was trying so hard to contain. And instead of recognizing that as healthy grief, as normal human emotion, he resented me for it. He was jealous that I could let it out when he couldn't. He was angry that I was showing what he was too scared to feel. So he lashed out. He pushed me away. He said those horrible things because he was drowning and he needed someone to blame for how much it hurt. He said after the funeral, he tried to go back to normal life, tried to pretend he was fine. But he wasn't fine. He was a mess. His wife noticed, his kids noticed. He was snapping at everyone. He couldn't enjoy anything. And slowly, he started to realize what he'd done, how he treated me, how he'd blamed me for his own inability to cope, how he destroyed our relationship at the exact moment when we needed each other most. He said he wanted to call me 100 times, but he was ashamed. He didn't know how to admit he was wrong, didn't know how to take back the cruel things he said. So he waited and waited until finally his wife told him that if he didn't fix this, he'd regret it for the rest of his life, that he'd already lost his parents, and now he was losing his sister too. And that was a choice, not a consequence. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said he was sorry, that he loved me, that he needed his sister back, that he couldn't do life without me. He said he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but he had to try. He had to tell me the truth. He couldn't live with the guilt anymore. I sat there listening to all of this. Part of me wanted to yell at him, to tell him how much he hurt me, how alone he made me feel, how I went through the worst thing in my life without my brother because he was too busy managing his own emotions to care about mine. But another part of me understood. Because grief does weird things to people. It makes you act in ways you never would otherwise. It brings out sides of you that you didn't know existed. I thought about mom and dad, about what they would want. They'd want us together. They'd want us to forgive each other. They'd want their kids to be a family. Grudges poison family more than grief does. I knew that. I'd seen it in other families. People who let one fight, one moment of pain, destroy decades of love. And I didn't want that. I didn't want Daniel and me to become strangers because of the worst day of our lives. So I told him the truth. I told him he hurt me deeply. That what he said at the funeral was cruel and unfair. That abandoning me during my hardest time of my life was something I'd never forget. I wanted him to know the full weight of what he'd done. Not to punish him, but because real forgiveness requires real honesty. You can't heal something you're not willing to acknowledge. But then I told him something else. I told him I forgave him. Because holding on to anger, holding on to resentment, it wasn't hurting him. It was hurting me. It was keeping me from healing fully. It was keeping me stuck in that funeral home, stuck in that moment of rejection and pain. And I didn't want to live there anymore. I also told him that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, that I could forgive him for what he did while still remembering the lesson it taught me. That people you love can hurt you deeply, even unintentionally. That grief can turn people into versions of themselves they don't recognize. And that protecting my own peace and mental health had to come first, even in family relationships. Daniel cried. Actually cried. It was the first time I'd seen him show real emotion since Mom and Dad died. And in that moment, I saw my brother again. Not the cold stranger from the funeral, but the person I grew up with, the person I loved. He was still in there. He'd just been buried under layers of pain and fear. We talked for over an hour that night. We talked about Mom and Dad, about our favorite memories, about things we missed about them, about how hard it was to navigate holidays and birthdays without them. And for the first time since they died, I felt like I had my brother back. Like we were finally grieving together the way we should have from the start. Daniel asked if we could start over. Not forget what happened, but move forward from it. Rebuild our relationship with the understanding that we both needed to do better, to communicate better, to support each other better. And I agreed. Because family is complicated, family is messy, but family is also worth fighting for when the foundation is real love. In the months that followed, things slowly got better between us. We started having those Sunday dinners again, continuing the tradition Mom and Dad started. We brought our kids together. We checked in on each other regularly. We went to therapy, both separately and once together, to work through our grief and our relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still times when the hurt came back to the surface. But we pushed through because we chose each other. We chose family. I learned something important through all of this. I learned that you can honor your parents' memory by choosing peace over grudges, by choosing forgiveness over revenge, by choosing to heal instead of staying wounded. Mom and Dad didn't raise us to be enemies. They raised us to be each other's support system. And even though we failed at that in the worst moment, we didn't have to fail forever. I also learned that setting boundaries isn't the opposite of forgiveness. I forgave Daniel, but I also made it clear what I needed from our relationship going forward. I needed honesty. I needed respect for how I process emotions. I needed him to show up for me the way I'd always shown up for him. And he agreed to all of it because he knew he'd almost lost me for good, and he wasn't willing to make that mistake twice. Today, almost 2 years later, Daniel and I are close again. Not exactly the way we were before, because you can't go back after something like that, but maybe better in some ways, more intentional, more honest, more aware of how fragile relationships are and how much work they require. We visit Mom and Dad's graves together on their birthdays and their anniversaries. We share stories about them with our kids. We keep their memory alive in the way we live our lives and treat each other. Would I change what happened if I could? Absolutely. I wish Daniel had handled things differently at the funeral. I wish we'd leaned on each other instead of pushing each other away. I wish we hadn't lost those months to silence and hurt. But I can't change it. None of us can change the past. All we can do is decide what we do with the present. All we can do is choose who we want to be going forward. And I chose to be someone who forgives, not because Daniel deserved it immediately, but because I deserved peace. I deserved to let go of the anger that was weighing me down. I deserve to have my brother back in my life, because at the end of the day, we only get one family, one shot at these relationships. And losing mom and dad taught me that life is too short and too unpredictable to waste time on grudges that don't serve us. If you're dealing with a family rift, especially one that happened during grief or trauma, I want you to know that healing is possible. It's not always easy, it's not always quick, but it's possible. You have to decide what matters more to you, being right or being at peace, holding on to hurt or opening the door to forgiveness, staying stuck in the worst moment or choosing to move forward. And forgiveness doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean what happened was okay. It means you're strong enough to carry the memory of the pain without letting it define your future. It means you're choosing your own healing over someone else's punishment. It means you're honoring the people you lost by not letting their death destroy more relationships. I think about what Mom used to say all the time. She'd say that holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It only hurts you. And she was right. The months I spent being angry at Daniel, they didn't hurt him nearly as much as they hurt me. He was living his life, dealing with his own guilt. But I was the one carrying the weight of resentment. I was the one who couldn't move forward. Until I made the choice to forgive, I was stuck. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Grief is hard enough without letting it destroy your family. People say and do things they don't mean when they're in pain. That doesn't make it okay, but it does make it understandable. And understanding can open the door to forgiveness. You get to decide if you walk through that door. You get to decide if the relationship is worth saving. You get to decide what your boundaries are and what you need to feel safe moving forward. But if there's any chance, any possibility of rebuilding something real with someone you love, consider taking it. Consider the fact that years from now, you might regret holding on to anger more than you'd regret giving someone another chance. Consider the fact that the people you've lost would probably want you to choose love over hate, peace over resentment, family over pride. Daniel and I lost 3 precious months because we couldn't get out of our own way. 3 months we'll never get back. 3 months of supporting each other through grief that we missed. I don't want that for anyone else. I don't want you to look back and wish you'd forgiven sooner, wish you'd reached out sooner, wish you'd chosen differently. Life is too short, way too short. We learn that the hardest way possible. So if there's someone in your life, someone in your family who you're holding a grudge against, ask yourself why. Ask yourself if the reason is worth losing them. Ask yourself if your parents or whoever you've lost would want you to hold on to that pain. Ask yourself what freedom might feel like if you let it go. For me, freedom looked like having my brother back, like our kids growing up together again, like honoring mom and dad by being the family they raised us to be. That was worth more than being right. That was worth more than making Daniel suffer for his mistakes. Because at the end of the day, we'd both already suffered enough. We'd both already lost enough. Why lose each other too? I'm not saying it's easy. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, especially when someone really hurt you, especially when they hurt you during an already painful time. But I am saying it's worth it. The peace I have now, the relationship I have with my brother now, it's worth every hard conversation we had to have to get here. It's worth swallowing my pride. It's worth choosing to see his humanity instead of just my hurt. And I never forgot. I can forgive and still remember. I can move forward and still protect myself. I can love my brother and still honor the lesson I learned about boundaries and self-care. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You can hold space for all of it, the hurt and the healing, the forgiveness and the boundary, the love and the lesson. So that's my story. That's what happened when my brother ignored me at our parents' funeral and then came back months later looking for peace. I gave him that peace, not because he earned it immediately, but because we both needed it. Because family, real family, is worth the work. Because grudges poison everything they touch. And I refuse to let my parents' death poison what was left of our family. We honor them now, together, the way it should have been from the start. We light candles on their birthdays. We cook their favorite meals on holidays. We tell our kids stories about their grandparents. We keep their love alive by choosing to love each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard.
If this story spoke to you, hit that subscribe button.